welcome back to our latest episode of Healthspan Horizons. I am your host, Melissa, as always, back here with our CEO, Jasmine, and our special guest today, Adam Gries from Vitalism. Adam, thanks for joining us today. I'm super excited to chat with you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We're super excited about this and really looking forward to kind of hearing a different perspective on longevity and what you've been doing. So can you give me just a brief background? Who are you? What do you do? Let's start with who are you first, and then what do you do after that?
Sure. So mostly in my career, I've been a tech entrepreneur. I grew up in Israel and the US, and then I came to the US for undergrad, and basically have been building companies and software since 2006 or so. Built everything from apps, games, education technology platforms, e-commerce stuff. Probably reached about 80 million users on a variety of products, many projects reaching over 5 million users independently. And I've had an interest in the nature of self in parallel. My undergrad was in neuroscience, economics, and psychology. So I kind of explored those areas before diving into entrepreneurship, and did quite a lot of meditation, Vipassana retreats, 10 days. I've done 6 of those. And I've been interested in longevity for a long time, basically since seeing Aubrey de Grey in 2005 talk about longevity, escape velocity. And I just thought, oh, well, this is evidently, this is obviously a good idea. It seems like some smart people are working on it. I'm a poor student. I don't have a PhD. What am I going to do about it? So I should just focus on building my entrepreneurship career. And that's what I did basically until 2021, 2022, after which I decided to focus my energies on longevity. And so in the last 2-3 years, I've been investing, mentoring, and eventually started Vitalism, the movement of philosophy, and Vitalism Foundation, which is a nonprofit that is meant to accelerate that philosophy.
Awesome. So you basically are taking the advocacy approach, I guess, in terms of furthering our journey to longevity, escape velocity, which is super awesome. And yeah, so I already know about Vitalism, so I don't want to give away too much. But yeah, can you tell us exactly what Vitalist and Vitalism is, and what's kind of the goals of it, and how it all works and all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that I would replace the word advocacy with revolution, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So, Vitalism is really a revolutionary movement in that it seeks to completely upend the priorities of human society. And so if you think about society today, we do invest a lot of resources in trying to extend lifespans and trying to combat aging, which is, of course, the primary cause of death. But we do it in ways that, from the Vitalist view, are wrong. So we basically concede that death is an inevitability. And so we essentially neglect it and just treat it in a palliative way when you're talking about the approach to death. So in society, we typically wait until people get old and very frail. Then they have these so-called diseases of aging, which are really just a result of aging itself. So calling them diseases of aging is just kind of strange. It's like almost this way to detach them from the process of aging, even though they're directly connected, meaning the relationship is that if you are aged, you will get these diseases. So, it's almost like if I slam this bat in your head will collapse and you will die. So what is the relationship here? It's a very direct relationship. And then, when people are on their last legs, then we throw billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in the US annually on the last 3 years of life. So you got to ask yourself, well, we're trying to extend lifespans very much with our capital. That's what our revealed preference is. But are we doing it in the right way? And so the Vitalist perspective says that if you believe that death is the problem, that's the first point in the Vitalist Declaration. Death is humanity's, life is good, death is humanity's core problem, and aging its primary agent. If you believe that death is the core problem, then palliative measures are simply not an acceptable way to spend resources. because you're not just trying to make somebody feel good and then essentially you lose, right? You want to solve so that you win. And to solve for you to win, you need to treat the root cause. And what's the primary root cause of death for most humans? It's aging. Obviously, there are other causes of death. You could get hit by a bus. You could eat some poison apple. All sorts of bad stuff can happen. But if we want to address if we want to address death as a core problem, we want to address the primary cause. Primary cause is aging. It affects the most people, causes the most harm. Then we need to really reallocate the resources of society. And that's why, the difference between advocacy and revolution is that advocacy typically suggests working within a system, and revolution suggests changing the system fundamentally. Now, where does the border lie between those two outcomes is sometimes unclear. For example, the current election, where the techno-libertarian group essentially bought their way into government with $44 billion for Twitter, plus a few $1 billion for Trump's campaign. Is that a revolution? I mean, maybe it's kind of a bloodless change of, let's say, elite dominance in a specific society. But it's certainly not advocacy. You know what I mean? I feel like the results of advocacy would be something like, okay, well, we convinced the NIH to dedicate another $2 billion to geroscience. Whereas what we want to do is create an whole society redirection to solve the problem, which is death, and its primary agent, which is aging.
Okay, you're basically like jumping into my next question, which was going to be about the life is good, death is bad type of thing. So within Vitalism, with that being as like your core foundation, what's your approach, or what are you, as we're trying to advocate for a revolution per se, how are you guys going about that? What's the route to the end goal?
Yeah, great question. Right. So if you say, well, today humanity spends a tiny fraction of its resources trying to solve death, and by extension, trying to solve aging at the root as the primary cause of death, how could you change that? How could you 100x that resource, attention, policy, regulation, value, and so forth? I think the core problem is that most people in society believe that death is inevitable, and therefore they choose their actions accordingly, right? So it's not that people want to die. Nobody wants to die. Nobody wants to age either. It's just that sources of authority and prestige in society, the medical establishment, their doctor, the government, basically sends them the message and indoctrinates them from a very early age that death is inevitable. We're doing the best we can. The best we can do is to keep you alive until 90 or 100, even though you'll be kind of a piece of junk by that point, but maybe you'll be somewhat alive. And then peaceful death, quote unquote, is the best you can hope for, meaning relatively painless, like die in your sleep kind of situation. So with a population that's been indoctrinated to believe this, it's you're in a kind of difficult situation. What you're really competing with is the status and prestige of being able to convey these different ideas and to manage budgets. So how do we get status and prestige and influence? That's really how I would just reframe the question a little bit. And I would say we have a few paths. So one path, this was the first path that we explored, was the electoral path. So, the Mormons, the Zionists, and other groups, they were like, hey, we feel disenfranchised. Why don't we just move somewhere where we're not disenfranchised, and we'll create our own state, right? So we will have the power of the state. We will define the mores. We will control the budgets. We will control prestige and status. So the Mormons did that in Utah. The Zionists did in what is now Israel. People can have different opinions of it, but the fact is they managed, both these groups, as an example, managed to accumulate large amounts of leverage by taking that action. So you could ask, would people who care about this, would Vitalists be able to pursue that approach? Our conclusion today is that it's likely not going to be a favored path. It's low probability of success because people who align with the Vitalist Declaration are often not willing. They don't have as strong impetus to relocate physically. And that's necessary for this. So if you think about Mormons or Jews in Europe or the Arab countries, you know, the Mormons only moved to Utah after the Mormon Wars in Illinois. They were settling in Illinois, but people didn't like that. And so they were being attacked physically and they felt, disenfranchised. So like people who today are vitalists and they feel it sucks that society isn't doing much, but they're not being like disenfranchised on a daily basis in ways that are threatening to their physical safety, right? So their motivation to move physically is much reduced. And that's a limiter in this kind of strategy. Strategy number 2 could be to try to lobby. So I would call that advocacy. And there are organizations that do that, like A4LI does that in the US. They're a great organization, and there are other organizations. But the problem is that the leverage that you get from advocacy is very limited. So if you think about the kind of advocacy that you get, like trying to convince somebody in Congress in the US to vote differently on the Health and Human Services Appropriations Committee, which has 17 members in the House and 17 in the Senate. Okay, like how many of those members need to really agree with you to push the committee to vote by majority, right? You need 9 people. It's not enough to just have your 1 or 2 or 3. The others need to be convinced and then vote for something like moving $1 billion in the NIH. Let me tell you, it's really difficult. And even if you do it, let's say you give a mandate to the NIH, but the career bureaucrats, the people who, the Trump side calls the deep state, if they disagree with you, you think they're going to put the budgets in the place that is going to be useful? Of course not. Some person who is applying for a grant at some university, right? Let's just imagine a hypothetical. So we invest in heart disease, right? And somebody says in the Health and Human Services Appropriations Committee, they got a lot of money from the Alzheimer's Society. They donated to their campaign from an Alzheimer's super PAC. And that super PAC got 4 or 5 members on that committee to really support Alzheimer's research. So they basically issue a mandate to the NIH to then, study Alzheimer's with $1 billion a year. Okay, let's just imagine this scenario, right? Now, the NIH committee that's in charge of this and the person in charge of allocating that budget, they actually don't care about Alzheimer's. They care about heart disease, and they disagree with this mandate. What's going to happen? Well, some researcher at MIT is going to submit a grant proposal for $5 million. And they're going to hear, oh, wait, there's an Alzheimer's, allocation. So what they'll do is in the grant, they'll change the verbiage to say heart disease and its relationship to Alzheimer's, yada, yada. They get the grant, and then they study to a minimal amount the stuff that has to do with Alzheimer's, and they spend 90% of the money studying something else completely, as long as they can check the box and then submit something in a paper later down the line. All I'm saying is that when you think about influence and your ability to project it, if you go through the lobbying path, it's very hard to guarantee that the money actually goes where you want it to go. There are some exceptions. For example, the FDA has a particular path for approving certain types of therapeutics. We all know that. There are expedited paths, there are other paths. You could imagine lobbying for a new path for longevity therapeutics, which has different categories, or health improving therapeutics. If that could pass, or if a new agency were created, that could have higher leverage. But again, to get these things to happen has multifactorial levers that you have to push. And that takes potentially years to have the right coincidence of kind of powers that be who agree to push this stuff forward. That's path 2. And as you can see, path 2 is also very limited in your ability to predict what it is that's going to happen from your advocacy. Path 3 is to actually try to get your people into government directly. So you could say that what Elon Musk did right now is that, right? David Sachs is in government. Elon Musk is effectively in government. Key people from the PayPal mafia, Andreessen, Thiel, etc. ecosystems literally have staffed key government positions. Jim O'Neill at Health and Human Services, right? He used to be CEO of SENS. It's a big deal. He's going to be RFK's deputy, probably. So if you do that, now you are the executive and you could be much more assertive about guaranteeing where the budgets go and defining policy. But obviously the problem with doing that is that you need to have some alliance that you're in that's sufficiently well funded and sufficiently well staffed so that you can staff these positions with smart people who agree with you and that you have enough money to actually have influence in an election. And of course, it's different in like the CCCP, in China, they have their own way of doing things or whatever, but still you need some sort of power and money to get these kind of levers. And so what I would say where we are today with Vitalism Foundation strategy is I think that we need to collaboratively build an ecosystem, which is a Vitalist ecosystem, which is kind of parallel or intersecting with the techno-libertarian ecosystem that managed to acquire so much influence in the recent US election, and try to get influence by directly getting into positions in government and directly influencing elections by, participating, soliciting contributions, running our own candidates, and so on and so forth. And this is incredibly difficult. I mean, ridiculously difficult.
I have a lot of comments on all of that. First of all, as somebody who used to be Mormon, I appreciate you referencing them moving to Utah and like creating their own, I'm not going to call it a utopia, but essentially kind of like as a reference guide for living in your own place. That was like my first thought about that. So in relation to that, I guess we'll pause for a second. Is that kind of the goal with your pop-up city in Berkeley, is to like that you guys have planned for later this year, is to kind of bring together Vitalists of like mind, or what's the goals and the initiatives behind the pop-up city? We'll do that first, and then I'll bring my comments back later.
Great question.
Yeah, that was another aspect too, just to add on to that. Like there's this concept now of network states, and it's kind of talking to that first point that you made about the problem of people being elsewhere in the world scattered when they have an aligned goal and purpose, and they could be people in all different types of tiers, and like how do you get them together? And there's been this whole eruption of like pop-up cities all over the world that I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, really great points and questions. I'll try to unpack from the last to the first. So when you talk about network states, and you could think about in some way Zionists as an early kind of proto-network state, right? Because they were separated in all these different countries, but they were connected in this identity way, etc. But obviously they have this religion, and religions are almost like this virus that's been evolutionarily adapted over like thousands of years to be extremely effective, right? And I mean this like, I don't mean it in a pejorative way. I literally mean like, there are ways that religions work that just are kind of extremely well adapted to human biology and psychology, right? And this is through the trial and error and monumental efforts of millions of human beings who each in their own lifetime were trying to promote the ideology of that religion, right? So if you compare that to like these new ideas of network states, most of these network states simply don't have an underlying population and viral idea, which is sufficiently strong and compelling to keep them together. So even though I like the idea kind of theoretically of network states, I feel like many of them lack the underlying drive that would create kind of long-term sustainability or fast growth. And I think that's what we've kind of seen. There are these attempts, but they're not really taking on that much. And I'm open to of course, debating that or exploring other perspectives. Regarding Vitalist Bay, so why do it? It's not about getting people together to then like create a simulation of like, what if we had a city that were all Vitalists, or what if we had a country that were all Vitalists? Although I think that's a cool aspect of it. We will have more Vitalists, and I think that in a way, having Vitalists in one space does have a specific benefit, which is that when you go into that space, you are in an artificial environment where you have the permission to think differently. And you could say, the social context, which is a source of gravity to pull you in a certain direction. So if you are, just like in any social circle, right? If everybody in your social circle drinks alcohol and eats meat, well, you have a lot of kind of pressure. It's very implied, and you will likely eat meat and drink alcohol. Whereas if everybody is vegan and, instead of drinking goes out to do yoga or meditation, you will find yourself doing that. And I feel like there's an importance to creating, let's say, an artificial majority of a particular perspective, right? So that is one aspect of Vitalist Bay. But the aspects that are more important are what we use as the slogan for the event. The motto is longevity's new capital. And the idea there if you believe that we need to somehow get influence, whether in different key positions or by consolidating capital to achieve different positions and influence, then how do you get that capital coordinated and consolidated, right? Right now, we're sitting here, maybe all three of us are Vitalists, but if I didn't meet Jasmine in Singapore, we'd never know about each other. If I didn't meet you now, we'd never know about each other. How could we coordinate? How could we collaborate, right? There's no kind of centralized source of gravity which attracts us all. And so new capital is a triple entendre. It's intended to be a physical place where for 2 months, everybody in, I would say, the most influential place for innovation on the planet, and now substantially in government, meaning the Bay Area, will know that this is the hub. If you want to do anything that has to do with longevity, there's this place for these 2 months where you can just go and everybody who matters, or many of those who matter, are going to be there. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is, in the Bay Area, you probably have the highest concentration of venture investors and angel investors in the world. And many of them, most of them, don't invest in longevity. How does that make sense? So if you want to consolidate capital and you want there to be new capital in the game, you need to be in the Bay Area. And if you want to take advantage of the network effects of the Bay Area, you need to be there for an extended period. You can't just do a 3-day conference. You need, Jasmine, who may be Jasmine, Jasmine something, who's in the Bay Area, to go to her other friend, Aaron H., and tell him, hey, Aaron, I was at this amazing event last week. It's going on until the end of May. I think you should check it out, right? And maybe Aaron happens to be a billionaire because he was an early, Yahoo employee or something like that and bought into Alibaba when, Sun San did that, whatever, right? That's like the Bay Area. And so being in that epicenter for an extended period is very valuable. And the third value of it is what we all know from conferences and bringing people together. Serendipity, right? Human capital, finding people to collaborate with, getting government, crypto, startups, investors, policymakers in one place. This hasn't happened anywhere. All the conferences that exist today, first of all, they're very short. And secondly, you have these pop-up cities, usually somewhere very hard to get to, which is self-selected for a very limited set of people. And the conferences often have like this very narrow view. Oh, this is an academic conference. This is a startup and investing conference. This is a policy conference, etc.
I think that's a great point. Sorry, Jasmine, I think I cut you off there, but there's something to be said, and I think we say this pretty much every conference that we go to. The longevity circle is small, and when you get immersed in this space and realize the connections that you can make within it, I think it's so much more effective in a variety of platforms and ways in terms of like research and networking and, like you mentioned, investors and so forth. So bringing it together in Berkeley is a really great opportunity. I know Jasmine's planning on heading back there as she gallivants around the world. So
yeah, I was thinking we kind of didn't formally intro the event, but yes, I will be stopping by and participating in whatever capacity that I can. And so I guess I wanted to kind of maybe transit into some of these more like how you mentioned at the end of life that we're willing to pour in as much money and pretty much sacrifice everything to keep somebody alive, even if it's they're not even conscious, right? And it's so what can we actually do at all different levels of in this sense of cultural revolution to kind of make people make sense out of that and realize it, and that we ought to be allocating the funding differently rather than extending someone's suffering and actually working towards solutions to really help them to be alive longer and healthier.
Right. Well, I think that this has a few aspects. One is you could change perspectives just by being in a position of influence. So you could think about movements like women's suffrage or the climate change movement or the green movement. So, a cultural change like this ultimately, I think it can happen in a few ways, right? One way that cultural changes happen is when you have a determined group that somehow achieves a substantial amount of influence. And the way they achieve influence, maybe just by being an intolerant minority and trying to get, more positions of increasing influence, right? So what are examples of that? I mean, maybe Christianity, like early Christianity. Of course, it took a long time. There were plenty of martyrs in that process because Christians were initially persecuted. And then if you look at other movements, right, you have like the Green Movement. So that's an interesting case because it's like there wasn't one thing that was affecting everybody, but there was this growing set of things, pollution here, some other issue there. And so different local initiatives started popping up alongside kind of a thematic connection, which is like this romanticization of nature, right? And humanity's connection to nature. But it still took 30, 40 years for the green movement to achieve more influence, right? The environmental movement. Now, I think generally changes often happen outside of these examples of Christianity. And I'm sure each one of these, they're historians who will underscore the economic underpinnings or the sociological reasons that whether Christianity or the environmental movement emerged when they did and got influence when they did. But I would say that there are certain movements and cultural changes that are more easily connected to an underlying change in economics. And broadly speaking, it's often the case that the cultural change and the political ideology and the philosophical ideology are a result of an economic change, right? So in communism, it was a change in the means of production, right? Going to the workers. And you could say that that outcome of the Industrial Revolution was a predicate upon which communism and Marxism were formed and could not have formed without. And by the same token, if you think about, the rise in individual industrial capacity and individual agency that happened in the Renaissance, right? That was a predicate for the Reformation, for Protestantism, and then later for overall kind of liberalism and republicanism. So this whole idea that like the individual should be able to be a free agent with human individual rights rather than a serf for some noble person was arguably a result of these changes too. And so I think, where we are, we're benefiting from two positive tailwinds. One is AI is likely going to change the relationship between work and prosperity. And so we're already seeing that, and we expect to be seeing a lot more than that, of that. And I think when you think about different kind of movements like, Don't Die, which Brian Johnson has built and is promoting, and other movements, they often have this AI aspect, right? So they're saying something massive is changing in the world. There's going to be super intelligence or general intelligence, artificial, and therefore we need a new philosophy to contend with that, right? So that's like one aspect of things. And then on the other side, we have, I would say, just a growing number of people who are understanding the limitations of our current system when it comes to aging. Just completely unrelated to the philosophy that says, hey, death is the problem, yada, yada. It's just that like, it's unsustainable to have one working person for 3 elderly people. It's unsustainable to spend $1 gajillion on entitlements in a society, right? Like it doesn't make sense to spend $40 billion studying a disease of aging, quote unquote, and making no headway in 40 years, specifically in this case, Alzheimer's, with no effective therapeutic, when all you're basically doing is you're looking essentially at the late stage of aging. That's really the pathology you're looking at. And you're saying, oh, well, this building is already completely rotten and falling apart. And now I'm going to try to fix the building by putting like some, very specific intervention in this brick, which is kind of what these therapies really are. Because even if you cure cancer completely, Matt Caberline published a study, and others have done it too. All cancers completely cured, all Alzheimer's completely cured. You're only buying 3 or 5 years. the poor 89-year-old who had that disease, if it's eradicated, they're still going to die in 93 from a stroke or from a broken bone or from something else. So, I mean, who are we kidding here? This is it's just like this is crashing into the wall of reality. And so on that front too, we have these kind of different points in society that are realizing this, more like the environmental movement. And so they're very independent because they each have their own issue that they're dealing with. And those are also bubbling up.
Yes, we definitely, got onto some interesting points about, sometimes how a collective, um, kind of feudal way of thinking kind of takes over, even though it's irrational. And it just kind of dominates. And, I guess the importance of being able to aggregate people along these same lines in the disciplines that matter. And it seemed like you very much highlighted the economic part of it too, so that, we need, the actual capital and funding to be coming into it as well. And that ties into, hosting it in a place where, how you mentioned, there is, billionaires and entrepreneurs and whatnot coming to this place for other reasons, to actually spark their interest in these irrationalities that the total human population are maintaining. I mean, we have seen.
I think there's something to be said for it, because a lot of times we think that some things are really radical, and not that I'm saying that vitalism is radical, but like you were mentioning, these small subsets that like start something are essentially what change or make a revolution, like the French Revolution, like the Great, like all these movements that we're saying. So it's not something that I believe could be very far off. We talk a lot with various different people on this podcast about basically the shift in mindset needs to be from like reactive healthcare to like preventative healthcare. And that's just, I think that vitalism falls into that category with your fundamentals of being like, okay, well, the entire mindset of everyone needs to drastically shift so that aging is not the primary focus. It's like everything else prior to that is really what we're spending time, effort, and money to try and alleviate and allocate ahead of time.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, I would say that like the secular trends that are creating our confrontation with aging or bringing it to a head are simply unmalleable, meaning the population is aging. This is just a matter of fact. That is causing an economic crisis. That's also a fact. The efforts that we spend on trying to address these pathologies by looking at the very late stages of aging are not going to work. That is also a fact. And we just like can't deny the amounts of money that are being set on fire when we don't have money for other things like basic services in different areas of society in different countries. So these things are coming to a head. And you could say that a lot of the things that are happening kind of are corollary to that in the context of technology development and biology intervention, right? So I think when you look at some of the movement of the Overton window, like how is it that the three leaders of major AI companies, Demis Hassabis, Dario Amodei, and Sam Altman, are all talking about substantially extending lifespans just in the last like month or so? Everybody knows Sam Altman invested, he said half of his liquid net worth into Retro Biosciences, which is reputedly now going to raise $1 billion for extending lifespans. I mean, they say extending like at least 10 years or whatever, but their goal is extending lifespans. And Sam Altman is an unapologetic, vitalist, whether he self-identifies that way or not. Same thing with Brian Armstrong and New Limit, which is also working on like epigenetic reprogramming. So if this is happening, meanwhile, Brian Johnson is moving the Overton window for kind of the mass market through a strategy of going for like the wellness world, essentially it's almost like a Trojan horse. Hey, grab this supplement. It's really pure. Trust me, because I measured everything. But by the way, you're doing it under the banner of don't die. And so when I ask you, let's say, Melissa, you have this don't die, snake oil, and you use these supplements, et cetera, and you're already somewhat committed because you put your money there, right? And I asked you, so what do you think about dying? Well, I mean, you have some cognitive dissonance because you're like, well, I've committed my money towards a brand that says don't die. So now it's harder for you to say I'm pro die, right? Because everything that Brian is promoting is like, don't be for die culture, be about don't die culture, right? And so I think that these things happening in the last year and two years, this is not a coincidence. You'd have to be blind to believe that like they're not connected, but they're both an outgrowth of these secular trends that are just producing a conflict between current reality and where I think humanity is kind of pushing towards.
Yeah, I mean that's like not really it, right? It's almost like we're all going to converge at that point at some point in time, but I guess we're working to accelerate the speed to which we get there, so we don't waste more time and more lives. And then you kind of highlighted a lot on this AI point, and we're also an AI company. To what extent do you think that AI or even AGI or ASI, as even they're saying now, is going to accelerate the progress of defeating aging? Do you think that it's going to be, because you mentioned Brian Johnson. I mean, part of his don't die ethos, even though it's a little bit baked in, is that, hey, like we're going to be in this, we need to stay alive long enough to see artificial superintelligence come along so it'll solve all the problems now. But then there's the other side that says, no, we actually have to like fund biotech and, make it happen. It's not just going to be the magic AI takes over and helps everything. So where do you kind of fall in that spectrum? How influential can artificial intelligence be in bringing us there faster?
Yeah, great question. So, I'm not a religious person. And so I have a hard time just going off of faith, which is not a result of personal agency. So when one says, oh, the AI will just save us, I just like cannot relate to that because first of all, we don't know what timeline that's going to be at. And it just takes away your agency. Like if AI could be a really important tool, then what you should do is invest all your energy to accelerate the AI so that it helps you, right? You can't just sit there passively and say the AI will save me. You need to build, like, where did the AI come from? It came from humans. And a lot of people say like, well, the AI needs the data. Do we have the data? Do we have the lab automation that would quickly enable the AI to get the data? Now, look, so that's where, you know, a lot of what Brian Johnson talks about is maybe different than the Vitalist perspective, which is a perspective of agency, meaning we need to take initiative to accelerate to solve the problem. No matter what, even if it turns out that our initiative didn't make a difference in the end, we need to take initiative. That's our philosophy. That's our value set, because it could be that it'll be the difference between keeping our parents alive and not, right? And our parents are much older than us, so they don't have as much time left, for example. Now, AI in general, I'm convinced at this point, and this was not the case when we started Vitalism 2.5 years ago, when we started even just like coming up with these ideas. There was no ChatGPT, that was popular. None of that stuff existed, or it was in labs, like nobody knew about it, and it wasn't like sufficiently ready for prime time. But now it seems to me inevitable that the world is headed for severe dislocation. So during COVID in January of 2020, I predicted when lockdowns would happen. And that was because I started tracking Twitter. I was reading about like the virus and, I'm a growth guy. That's what I did most of my career. I mean, I was the founder of these companies, but my focus was product and growth. And so I did some analysis about the numbers, just like publicly available data that was coming out of China. And when China locked down Wuhan, I was like, okay, it seems like whenever there are 500 people in a city that are reported as having COVID, China is forced to lock down the city. They lock down an entire province the size of France in population, which they would never do because you could say whatever you want about the Chinese, but they like making money. So they would only close down a province economically if the alternative was suicide. And so I looked at that and I was like, well, obviously this is out of control. This is like going to be a global pandemic. This is a total catastrophe. I did the numbers on like how many Chinese had already entered the US from Wuhan based on flight data. And I was like, the US will be forced to lock down in mid-March. So I made these stock market bets during that time and had like a 50x return. And I was stuck in lockdowns watching this unfold like a train wreck, like living through The Big Short, knowing that 1 million people were going to die. The reason I mentioned this whole story is because I think we're in exactly the same situation right now, but with AI. So people are sitting here. They think that, first of all, the Biden presidency, 4 years, there was this illusion of, oh, things are back to normal. Things are never going to be back to normal. There's no normal anymore in the world. And especially when you think about, like, there are all these other factors, like going to a multipolar world, et cetera, and the US kind of prioritizing its interests rather than like the global economy first. But I think when you look at AI, it's much more severe and it's much more like the COVID thing in the sense that you have an exponentially powerful technology that's growing, maybe even hyper exponentially. And people are sitting there thinking which college their 8-year-old is going to go to. There's not going to be any college in 10 years. There's a complete misunderstanding of the level of severity of dislocation, which is just almost upon us. Now, I don't know if it's going to happen in 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, but like I'm expecting catastrophic job losses, severe civil unrest in different ways, and at the same time, dramatic acceleration technologically. So what does that look like, this acceleration technologically? So there are people out there who are saying, but the AI doesn't have the data. So we'll go out there and with our pipettes, get the data for the AI. Come on, people. The AI will create robots. The robots will create automated labs. They don't need you to be in the labs. They're not going to need you at all. And that's going to happen maybe not in 3 years, so it'll happen in 4 years. I mean, Elon Musk thinks that there are going to be 500, he wants there to be 500 million embodied AIs, robots of different types. I don't know if you guys are watching these like robot videos coming out of China. I mean,
I haven't seen those the last. I mean, I know Boston Dynamics was doing some pretty cool stuff, but I don't know what China's doing. I know the DeepSeek obviously has made the news lately, and
just forget about it. I mean, these robots are going to be superhuman. Like they might be in a year. They might be already in some lab. So you're telling me that we need to collect data for them because they can like manage an agar plate in a biolab? Please. I mean, by the way, you know how many lab specimens are contaminated because humans are basically infested with bacteria and other stuff? Obviously, it would be better for robots to do it. So, like, it's inevitable that the robots will do it. And so I think what we're talking about is the big questions that we ask ourselves are, number one, how do we make sure that humans don't get killed off or that we have a good option to merge with AI, et cetera? I mean, I concede that's a question, but I would never stop AI. Like, there are all these people in the like effective altruism community and others, like, you know, Yudkowsky, et cetera. They're like, let's pause. And I'm like, guys, our P-doom is 100% from aging. So I'm not pausing. The only thing that's worth discussing is how we move forward. And so moving forward, you know, I think if we believe in agency, then we should be pushing forward on AI that has to do with biology and AI that can help us with, you know, essentially extending lifespans. And to do that, maybe if we build some of the lab automation, the robots, help think about some of the different AIs, adapt them to biology, like Retro Biosciences is doing with OpenAI, maybe we can get more results sooner. But I got to tell you, I just wonder. I mean, in some days I wonder if like it really will matter. It's hard to say. I mean, I think we should. I think we should try our best to accelerate in the right direction. That's my bias.
I I'm not rendered speechless, but I'm like, man, where do I think I'm like questioning my own inner thoughts now of like, what do I think is capable in the next 10 years with AI and such? And I think for most of us that do not have a science and tech background, we're like, that's not it. It's like at the beginning of Google or like even the internet when we were just like, no, we only use this for Wikipedia. We only use it to, and we're only exchanging information one way. You would never put a credit card into the internet. That'd be crazy. I feel like that's where we are with AI right now, where we're like, oh, we only use ChatGPT to ask questions about things that we need. And like you said, there's so much more behind the scenes that is going to be happening in the next 5-10 years that we honestly, as normal lay people, can't even comprehend. And like robots in labs, that seems wild to me. Are we at an iRobot type of scenario here where like it just feels so far off for the normal person, but also the internet was so far off for the normal person. So there's so much room for growth that we don't even really recognize at this stage unless you are really in the midst of it, I feel like. So, oh my gosh, we're already like almost at 50 minutes. So I feel like we have to wrap this up. Jasmine, do you have a comments before we hit the last question?
Yeah, I mean, it's always just amazing to hear everyone's kind of perspective on this. And, you made a point about, the not ceasing to accelerate. And that's actually the main ethos of our parent project called Singularity Net, which Rejuve spun out of. And my co-founder and the founder of that project, Dr. Ben Gertzel, he's like super advocating for this, like, let's build AGI and make sure that it's collaborative and decentralized and has these human values kind of deeply baked into it, so that when they do emerge, they don't want to like hurt us and eliminate us, but see us as like kind of co-creators with them. So just to throw that in there, I guess.
Totally. It's fun. Just one thing before, the last question or however we want to go. Melissa, your comment about being not in it, I'll just share with you something which I find super remarkable. So I'm in the Bay Area, right? And the other day I was at a party and I'm just talking to somebody and I'm sharing these thoughts, right? And that's like the thing people talk about, like AI, blah, 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 right? So somebody joins our conversation. Turns out he's an engineer at OpenAI and he works. So I'm like, yeah, I feel like these embodied AIs, these robots, I mean, it's very easy for them to become like killer robots. They're stronger than you. Like, let's be real about this, right? And so he says, oh, well, I'm not involved in that. I'm in the training department. Okay. So I quit. Well, I served in the military and typically before soldiers kill, they train. So that's like your department. You're training the AIs and you think that you're completely unaffiliated with anything that's going on downstream of that. So my point is just like that, in the same way that you feel far away from it, even somebody who is at the heart of it can actually tell themselves a story that actually is just like, I don't need to think about the ramifications of this. I can just like be involved in the specific thing that I'm doing. And I think most people would be shocked at the number of people who feel that way, who are actually making this happen.
Right. I mean, we could kind of go with that with literally any part of history. Any part, like, well, I'm just doing my one part in the Nazi regime. I'm not actually doing anything with it. Right. It's like you could say that I guess our own little bubble blinds us to so much of the external factors of like the big picture. So not that I'm comparing any of these to like the Nazis, like let me just put that out there because that kind of took a weird turn from what was coming in my brain to what came out of my mouth. But more so just saying like, I agree with you. I think it's so easy for us to just like get in our own world and then be like, oh, holy shit. No, this is actually happening. I just didn't really notice while we were doing it. So that took a weird turn. I apologize. But in any case, we got to wrap it up.
It's trending these days, apparently.
Since we're on the thread, yeah. So last question, I guess it's a two-parter. So first one is, if people want to get involved with Vitalism, etc., how do people go about doing that with you for the first part? We'll do that first.
Absolutely. So if you want to be somebody who is an agent who is participating and not just observing this insane transition in human history, I encourage you to join us. You can go to vitalism.io. You can sign up with your email. Doesn't cost anything. Be part of the community and so forth. I also encourage you to join us at Vitalist Bay. You can check out more at vitalistbay.com. And that's going to happen in Berkeley, California, from April to May. So both months, April and May 2025. You can apply on the website. And if you mention RejuveAI in your application as where you heard of it, we will expedite your application for review. We're currently only taking people who apply to the waitlist. and that will guarantee your spot. We think that this will be a really big moment of inflection for this entire space. And so, yeah, I hope to connect with anybody listening.
Love that. We'll take that. I'll put that in our YouTube description too, so that if people want to take that, we can use it. But okay. And then my last question, which we kind of have dabbled on with all of our AI and stuff, is we always ask everyone, where do you fall in the longevity spectrum? Obviously, I feel like you might be a little more radical than just increasing your health span. So, or are you to the stage of, no, I want to be a humanoid robot with my brain implanted in it? Where do you fall? What's your dream for your own personal longevity?
So, I hate to be that person, but I have to answer the question. I'll answer the question, but also reframe it if you don't mind. And what I'll say is that the question about how long you want to live, to paraphrase Jordan Peterson's kind of funny meme that's been all over Twitter, if you want to answer that question, then you have to clearly understand the meaning of what long means, how long, what you means, what want means, and what to live means. So let me unpack that a second. First of all, long. What do we understand about time? Until Einstein, we thought that time was like this immutable construct. Now we know that time may be mutable. So what is this reality? We don't really know. We're just born into it, and we're trying to make the best sense of it as literally consciousness stuck in a box, a dark box, which is trying to make sense of stimulus coming into it. I mean, that's our situation, for good or for ill. What is the I? I mean, if you ask me, would I be willing to create, merge with technology or upload myself to the cloud? What does that even mean? What is the nature of consciousness and the I? I feel like exploring that, we're so early in exploring that. And so, and wanting to live, of course, I think is easier because, there's this like sense of continuity of existence, right? Which is what we do want, I would say, as vitalists. So my answer is almost like that. Really, what I care about more than being alive is understanding the nature of reality, and that may be strange. To try to intersect with it, but fundamentally, if you're here in this world and you don't know what's going on, you're like, I was born into this world, I don't understand what's going on. It's pretty fabulous. And you're just trying to explore, learn more, grow, expand your curiosity. I mean, why would you ever want that to end unless you got to some chapter where then you wanted it to end? So my answer is, I want to go on as long as possible, as long as there's stuff to explore, as long as there's more to learn about the nature of reality. And I don't know how long that is. I don't even know what long means yet, because I'm such an ignorant creature. That's just like, I think, who was it who said it? Was it, Carl Sagan or somebody else who said that we're just a bunch of chemical scum on a rock suspended in a void? That's like what we are, people. This is bananas that we are even aware and we can have whatever this discussion is. So as long as possible,
I really like that answer because it's similar to mine too. It's like, how long do I want to live? Well, as long as you can get the most out of like this human experience. As long as like there's still, like you said, more to discover and learn a reason why I should want to transition to another state of not this.
It's great. I mean, I just want to say, maybe on a positive note, everybody who's listening to this should consider themselves incredibly lucky to be born at this point in history where such amazing potential opportunities are on the horizon that we may actually get to experience, explore, live through. And I think on the other side of that, it's a really great responsibility to try to do something to move in the right direction, in the positive direction. for society, for technology, to make sure that we benefit from this.
That was like a perfect conclusion right there that you just wrapped up for us in a nice little bowl. I love it. I think that we, especially as millennials, myself in that group of like going from no internet to the internet to cell phones to all this stuff, we've seen the progress of technology in our lifespan, and there's so much more that's going to happen. And now we get the blessing and the curse of being able to see what happens with that in the upcoming years more than any other generation prior to us. So I guess it's up to us to determine what that direction is and how fast it comes and where it goes and everything like that. So, Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a pleasure. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I'm excited to hear about Vitalist Bay, what you guys do with it, and have Jasmine give me all the inside scoop when she makes it there. And Jasmine, I'll let you. You had your mute off, so I'll let you talk before we.
I was just gonna say, thanks for joining us. This was, super awesome discussion and episode. I'm sure, everyone is going to, enjoy this. And we do have a lot of, people on the broad spectrum of futurism that are listening and tuning in, and I'm sure there are some waiting potential vitalists out there as well. So let's do it.
Cool.
I love it. All right. Thanks, Adam. We'll see you next time.